All right, let's dive into one of the most pivotal, game-changing battles in all of history, Adrianople. This is a wild story. It's about an empire that looked invincible, a refugee crisis that was totally botched, and one single day that pretty much broke the back of Rome and sent the Western world down a completely new path. Two-thirds. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the fraction of the entire Eastern Roman army that was just annihilated on one single hot summer day, August 9th, 378. We're talking tens of thousands of Rome's best soldiers gone, wiped off the map in just a few hours. It's insane. So the big question is how? How could the world's most powerful, most legendary military suffer a defeat this catastrophic? I mean, these are the Roman legions we're talking about, the backbone of the empire for centuries. So how did it all go so spectacularly wrong? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we need to rewind a bit. Because this all starts with a refugee crisis at the border that just spirals completely out of control. Okay, so let's set the scene. This whole thing doesn't kick off with a big invasion plan. Nope. It starts with a huge, desperate migration. You've got entire Gothic tribes just running for their lives, fleeing the Huns who are tearing through everything from the east. They show up at the Danube River, which is basically the front door to the Roman world, and they're not there to conquer. They're refugees. They're just looking for a safe place to live. And at first, the Romans say, okay, sure, come on in. They figured they could handle it. But that's not what happened. The whole deal went south, and it went south fast. You had corrupt Roman officials on the ground just totally exploiting these people. They were hoarding the food they were promised, treating them horribly. It was a nightmare. So what happens when you push desperate, starving people too far? They fight back. These refugees turned into a really angry, really formidable enemy. And by 377, it was an all-out revolt. So you can see how you've got two completely different points of view here, right? For the Goths, it was simple. We asked for help, and you betrayed us. But for the Romans, a situation they thought they could manage just blew up in their faces. A rebellion that was, let's be honest, fueled entirely by their own greed and terrible mismanagement. And here's the key takeaway, the real kicker. Rome literally created the enemy that was about to bring it to its knees. Now, the Goths are raiding all across the Roman province of Thrace, and the Eastern Roman emperor, a guy named Valens, decides, okay, that's it. Enough is enough. He decides he's got to respond with a show of overwhelming force. So he gets his legions together and he marches out to crush this rebellion once and for all. And in his mind, this is going to be a quick, easy Roman victory. No problem. But yeah, Valens makes a whole series of just terrible, fatal mistakes. First, he totally underestimates the Goths. He thinks they're just a disorganized rabble. Wrong. He's also hungry for all the glory himself, so he ignores warnings from his scouts. And this is the big one. He refuses to wait for backup. Reinforcements from the Western Emperor were on their way, but Valens didn't want to share the victory. So, puffed up with arrogance, he rushes his army headfirst into battle. Straight into a trap. And the two armies couldn't have been more different. It was a classic matchup of styles. You had the Romans, sticking to their famous playbook. Disciplined, heavy infantry. The legions, right? The guys on foot who had conquered pretty much everything. But the Goths, they were different. They were all about their heavy cavalry. Think armored knights on horseback, acting like shock troops. They were mobile, they were fast, and they could hit you from anywhere. And on that day near Adrianopolis, that difference in style was everything. The Gothic cavalry just slammed into the Roman flanks. They surrounded the legions, and then they just crushed them. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. We're talking an estimated 20,000 Roman soldiers killed. Just try to wrap your head around that number. And one of them was Emperor Valens himself. He died on that field. The emperor was dead. His army was gone. Just gone. You can't overstate the impact of this. The shockwaves from this one day, they just rippled across the entire Roman world. This wasn't just losing a battle. This was something breaking deep inside the empire itself. From a military perspective, Adrianople was a massive turning point. For hundreds of years, everyone just knew the Roman legion was invincible. It was the ultimate weapon. And that idea, it was completely shattered in one afternoon. And you know, the psychological blow of that, it was maybe even worse than losing all those soldiers. This defeat forced huge, seismic shifts in, well, everything. Militarily, the age of heavy infantry was over. The age of cavalry had begun. Politically, Rome just didn't have the manpower anymore. They had to start hiring more and more barbarian troops to fight for them. And strategically, the biggest change of all, the borders weren't safe anymore. That feeling of invincibility was gone for good. And this new reliance on so-called foederati, this was a massive deal. What does that mean? It means Rome was basically hiring its former enemies to be its new defenders. They let entire tribes settle inside the empire, and in return, those tribes had to provide soldiers for the Roman army. Now, on one hand, it's a practical fix, right? But it was a really risky long-term game. It blurred the lines between who was Roman and who was an outsider, until eventually those lines barely even existed anymore. Okay, so why are we still talking about a battle that happened over 1,600 years ago? I mean, what makes Adrianople so important? Why does it still matter? Because Adrianople was more than just a battle. It was like a giant flare that lit up all the cracks that were already forming in the Roman Empire. It proved that the rot inside, the corruption, could be just as dangerous as any army outside. And it was a brutal lesson that even the most powerful empire on earth can be broken by an enemy they underestimate and refuse to respect. And that leaves us with the big question historians still argue about today. Was Adrianople the beginning of the end for Rome? Was this the fatal wound, or was it just a symptom, a bloody sign of an empire that was already sick and dying from the inside out? There's probably no single right answer, but it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? It's a powerful reminder of just how thin that line can be between an empire's peak and its breaking point.